Hello and welcome to this video. This is going to be a lecture on the essay of studies by Sir Francis Bacon. So let's get started. Sir Francis Bacon was an English lawyer, statesman, essayist, historian, intellectual reformer, and most importantly, a champion of modern science. He was born in 1561 and actually achieved chancellorship, but he was removed from there on account of bribery. He is known as the father of modern science and is credited with the creation of the Baconian method. So the reason I'm saying all this is so that we can understand who he was and what compelled him to write the essay. Of Studies is actually a part of 10 different essays that were written and published by him, all dealing with similar topics. Of Studies became such a famous essay that several other historians and essayists wrote their own version or explanations of it. The most famous version is On Studies, which is written by Sir Samuel Taylor Johnson. Sir Francis Bacon actually attended Trinity College, Cambridge at the age of only 12 years old and later on attended the University of Poitiers. He passed away at the age of 65 due to pneumonia. So let's start with the essay. First, we need to understand a summary of the essay and what it is about. As stated, the essay deals with an understanding of why are studies or liberal arts education important. Now you have to remember that this essay was written 400 years ago, and 400 years ago, several words that we know today had different meaning from what they mean now. So the first word is the word studies itself. Now you might think that studies means academic studies, पढ़ाई जो हम लोग हर रोज करते हैं. But back in the 16th and 17th century, studies meant something completely different. It not only referred to the things that we studied in day-to-day life, that is our academic books and stuff, but it also referred to things like philosophy and education and practical learning. For example, if someone was learning how to be a carpenter, then it was also known as a form of study. If someone was learning a specific profession or learning a hobby, anything that was in a way of putting forward the educational or intellectual information of a person was known as study. It was never just padhai. So you have to remember the title of the essay of studies is talking about a much wider knowledge than just the academic studies, which is what he also discusses in this essay. In the essay, Francis Bacon gives all the different uses of studies, how too much or too little study can affect a person, how they can be used, and finally, what are the connotations of it. As said, this is one of his most famous essays and also provides a very compelling answer to the question of why liberal arts is important. So now we're going to look at a line-by-line explanation of the text. So the first line is actually a very famous line. It states that, and I will be reading this from here, is that studies serve for delight, for ornament, and for ability. Now there are two things to notice in the first sentence itself. First is the use of the word serve. So you must know that there is a proverb which goes that fire is a good servant but a bad master. So here also a similar theme is used where from the beginning Francis Bacon wants to make sure that people realize studies are something that you should use for your own service. Your life should not encompass studying as being the end all for everything, and it should also not be that you don't consider it to be something important. Studies are something which you use to serve your own fulfillment, your own enjoyment, or your own knowledge. So studies serve for three things, as he says: delight, ornament, and for ability. In the next sentence itself, he goes on to clear how they can be used in the three things. So he says, the chief use for delight is in privateness and retiring. As in, if you're someone who prefers to study or engage in learning for delight, that is, for your own enthusiasm and enjoyment, it's usually done in a private and retired manner, where maybe you prefer reading storybooks or reading up on your hobbies. Secondly, for ornament is in discourse. Now this refers to people who study as an ornamentation or as a way of increasing their knowledge only so that they can carry on discourse. Discourse here means holding intellectual conversation. Back in the 16th and 17th century, conversation was a much more important aspect of people's social lives than they are today. And also at that time, people carried on face-to-face conversation. अगर कोई चीज़ आपको नहीं पता है तो आप immediately उसको Google में जाके check नहीं कर सकते, which is why आपने जो पढ़ा है आप उसे कितना retain कर सकते हैं और conversation में दूसरों के साथ engage कर सकते हैं. That was also a measure of social standing. like people who belonged to the upper class or aristocratic society, were expected to have a lot of education, a lot of learning, because they could access universities and schools, whereas the working class could only discuss everyday things. But the aristocratic class, they were supposed to know everything about the different philosophers and so on. So he says that the second use of study is for ornamentation, that is in discourse or carrying out conversation. And the third is for ability, is in the judgment and disposition of business. यानी कि जो पढ़ाई करते हैं अपनी एबिलिटी या अपनी सेल्फ इम्प्रूवमेंट करने के लिए, जिसे वो बाद में अपनी जजमेंट इम्प्रूव करने के लिए या अपनी बिजनेस या अपने प्रोफेशन को इम्प्रूव करने के लिए यूज़ करते हैं. जैसे एक बहुत ही कॉमन चीज़ जो आपने ऑब्जर्व किया होगा, अगर आपने कोई भी इंटरव्यू देखी होगी किसी भी फॉर्च्यून 500 कंपनी की सीईओज़ के साथ, तो आपने नोटिस की होगी कि दे हैव अ वेरी एक्सपेंसिव वोकैबुलरी. दिस इज़ ऑल्सो वन मेजर ऑफ इंटेलिजेंस, but it can also lead to a feeling of conscientiousness or affectation, जहाँ पे people might feel कि you're overdoing it. So that is what he deals with next. For expert men can execute and perhaps judge of particulars one by one, but the general counsels and the plots and marshallings of affair come best from those that are learned. So here he's making a differentiation between people who are experts and people who are learned. You can be an expert just by reading books and different journals and scholarly articles, but being learned is a different thing. This again is the same difference as being educated and being learned. You might be an educated person, लेकिन अगर आप रास्ते पे वापस कचरा फेंक रहे हैं, so then the question comes, are you really educated? So a lot of education also comes from practical learning, which is what he says here, कि expert men can make judgments based on particulars, but for general counseling या फिर किसी affairs को set करने के लिए हमेशा best उन्हीं से आती है जो learned है by experience. In the next line he says, to spend too much time in studies is sloth. Sloth here is an animal, but it also refers back then to anyone who was extremely slow. It is also one of the 7 Christian sins. So अगर कोई अपने पढ़ाई पे ज़्यादा टाइम दे देता है, the person indulges in the sin of sloth, as in they become an extremely lazy person. So if you enjoy reading books and if you take the enjoyment to a very high level, what basically happens is you just keep on reading books and you neglect your other duties. So too much studying for enjoyment is bad because it turns you into a lazy person. To use them too much for ornament is affectation. यानी कि अगर आप ज़्यादा पढ़ाई को यूज़ कर रहे हैं अब सोशली लोगों को ये दिखाने के लिए कि you know big words and you know different things, you know about politics, it becomes affectation. Affectation is a kind of overshowing जो लोग different तरीके से दिखा सकते हैं, like by using their accents or by using big words. To make judgment wholly by their rules is the humor of a scholar. यानी कि आपको याद होगा उन्होंने 3 uses बताए थे, for delight, ability and for ornament. एंड फाइनली जो एबिलिटी के लिए थी, अगर आप ज़्यादा पढ़ाई करेंगे सिर्फ अपने प्रोफेशन के बारे में विदाउट एक्चुअली इंडल्जिंग इन एनी प्रैक्टिकल एक्सपीरियंस, देन यू हैव द ह्यूमर ऑफ अ स्कॉलर. Here humor just does not refer to comedy wala humor, but here the word humor means the constitution of a person. As in back then, humor referred to the entire mindset of a person. Like I could have said that he comes with a good humor. It won't just mean that he has a good sense of comedy, but it means in general he has a good sense of judgment, good way of speaking, everything. So to make judgment wholly by their rules, as in by studying, becomes the humor of a scholar, as in it gives you the mindset of a scholar. So one good example of this is that if you look at history teachers who focus only on names and dates and they don't really try to explain the political alliances or the reasons behind why certain wars or certain treaties were signed, so again that becomes just memorizing trivia. If you're focusing on general themes and having students read classics, then you should also try to explain the background of why it was written, how it affected society, what were the writings that came as opposition to that. So that is why today in the 21st century we have come up with classical humanism, which we will discuss later on. The next few lines go as, they perfect nature and are perfected by experience. For natural abilities are like natural plants that need pruning by study, and studies themselves do give forth directions too much at large, except they be pounded in by experience. So here what he is doing is he's trying to explain that ये एक symbiotic या reciprocal relationship है between studies and experience. You cannot have one without the other, because like he just said in the previous line, it will give you the humor or the mindset of a scholar with no practical experience. One explanation that he has used in this sense is that natural abilities are like natural plants. They need pruning, and by studying themselves, they give forth to directions too much at large. As in, by studying yourself and your behavior, by understanding where it comes from, you can create a much larger experience than the one you have attained. A framework that you have created can be abstract, but once you have applied that, then it becomes grounded in practical experience. Next he says, crafty men contemn studies, simple men admire them, and wise men use them, for they teach not their own use, but that is a wisdom without them, and above them won by observation. Read not to contradict and refute, not to believe and take for granted, not to find and talk discourse, but to weigh and consider. So what he's saying is that crafty men, as in people who are cunning and try to use this for their own good, they contemn studies, as in they use study for their efficiency and complexity. Simple men, as in men with a straight mindset, admire it, and wise men use them. यहाँ पे again this comes back to using of the word serve, that is wise men use studies to serve their own purposes. The reason this is so, because they not only teach their own use, but that is a wisdom without them, and above them won by observation. So this means that studies in itself means nothing. It is without a person to make sense of it. It is nothing. It is just an abstract concept. But once a wise person accumulates the knowledge and he can add his own practical experience and wisdom to it, he can evolve it in the way he needs. For example, if there are two people, A and B, person A has a certain life experience and things that he has known, and person B has a completely different life experience, completely different profession, knows completely different things. If both of them are provided with the same amount of information and knowledge, they will both process it in different ways, they will both add their own practical wisdom to it, and in the end result, they will come up with something that is totally different for these two people. Read not to contradict and confute. So here he tells the crafty men that you should not read just to contradict and confute people. The purpose of educating yourself is not so that you can talk over someone. जैसे आप देखते ही होंगे आजकल न्यूज़ चैनल्स में या कहीं पे भी, people are always talking over one another. People are not ready to listen to one another. It's just about making your opinion heard. But a good part of education is also listening to others' opinions so that you can form your own judgment without bias. So you should not read or educate yourself just to contradict other people or impose your own views on others. Not to believe and take for granted. So this he's talking about the simple men. So simple men just read whatever they find and they just take it for granted. And this is even applicable today, 400 years later. People might read a WhatsApp forward, people might read something on the internet, and they might just believe it without conducting any sort of background study. So again, he's telling, do not believe and take for granted. And the third is not to find, talk and discourse. As in, don't use it just to discourse on others, to carry on an intellectual conversation and show your social standings, show your educational standing, but to weigh and consider. That is, to understand, absorb and form your own opinions. So up till here, Francis Bacon was telling us how to read and how different men read. For example, he was telling us how crafty men read, how simple men read, and so on. And now he has come to the second part of the essay, where he's telling us what should we read. So first half mein, I hope it is clear that the point that he wants to make is that the entire basis of studies should be in reading them, understanding them, combining them with your own knowledge, experience, and then finally utilizing them. In the second part, he tells us what are the kinds of books that we should read. So, abhi tak there have been thousands of books published right from the beginning of the century and the centuries beforehand. So, how do we determine what kind of books are worth our time? So, one very simple test for this is to see if it has stood the test of time. There are several great classics written by Francis Bacon himself, Leonardo da Vinci, Wolfgang Goethe, Fyodor Dostoevsky, and many others. So these have withstood the test of time, and these are meant to be studied in a certain way. But there are also various novels written maybe in the past few decades that are not necessarily classics. These are meant to be read in a different way. And there are also those self-help books or any other books that you might enjoy reading as a hobby, books that you don't really want to read but maybe you find certain parts interesting. Those are meant to be read in a different way. And as you can see here, he has told us three different ways. The first is you can read by deputy and extracts made of them by others. That is, you can only read certain small parts of the book that interest you, and if you don't have time to flip through it, you can use the extracts made by others. But this sort of writing is only the less important arguments. But this sort of writing can only be used in the less important arguments. Again, he says that some books are to be tasted, others to be swallowed, and some few. So again, in rules of three, he tells us that there are some books that should be tasted, some that should be swallowed, and few that should be chewed and digested. So the first one he goes on to explain, that is the books that should be tasted, are those books in which you don't need to read the entire thing. You can only read an extract or a synopsis to only understand the main parts. These are the less important books, maybe books written which perhaps you want to read only to understand something better, to understand your hobby. The second is books which are meant to be swallowed. This refers to any recent novel that you see. These books are not necessarily classics, but it's still something that you enjoy reading, and it can be something that advances your intellectuality to some level. So these are books that you can taste. And finally, there are books which one should weigh and consider. That is, one should chew and digest. So this refers mainly to the classics and works that have stood the test of time. The next part goes as, reading maketh a full man, a conference a ready man, writing an exact man. And therefore, if a man write little, he had need have a great memory. If he confer little, he had need have a present wit. And if he read little, he need have much cunning, to seem to know that he doth not. So you can see that the grammar used here is also quite different from the grammar that we use today. Here he is addressing the effects of reading, conversing, and writing. So he's saying that reading maketh a full man, as in it creates a well-rounded man. Conference a ready man, as in conference here refers to someone who engages in talking or discourse. Conference creates a ready man, as in conversation makes a man who is very ready and quick thinking on his feet. He can immediately think up of things to say on the spot. And writing an exact man. So by this writing, he usually means people who engage in argumentative essay writing. He means people who write about the current happenings and not generally novelists. So he says that writing makes a man capable of thinking with logic and reason. So he has said that writing makes an exact man. यहाँ पे exact word का meaning वो नहीं है जो हम लोग आज सोचते हैं. Today the word exact might mean precise or an exact amount of something, a particular amount of something. But here it is referring not to an amount but to a person's characteristics. An exact man is someone who uses logic and reasoning and who does not speak beyond his means. So he says argumentative writing encourages this portion in a person's intellect. And further he says that if a person does not write very much, you can see in the next line he says, if a man write little, he had need have a great memory. That is, if a person does not engage in writing, he should have a good memory to compensate for what he's not writing. He should have a good memory to recall all the things that he has read till date and use them wisely. If he does not exercise the art of conversation, that is, if he does not talk to people, he needs to have a quick wit himself. And if he does not read very much, then he should be able to fake it, basically. He says that the person should be cunning enough to convince other people that he knows what he does not. So there are a lot of people who have been doing this, if you notice. Next on he says, histories make men wise, poets witty, the mathematics subtle, natural philosophy deep, moral grave, logic and rhetoric able to content. So here he's talking about how the different kinds of literature can affect people in different way. For example, he goes on to say that if you want people to be wise, then they should study history. The study of history, the study of whatever has happened in the past, gives men an understanding of what led up to it, and therefore it makes them wise, since understanding of previous certain things can help them avoid or better deal with such situations in the future. Secondly, poets are usually considered witty because of the normal wit that is needed to come up with exact lines and responses. Mathematics, subtle, as in he says that people who engage in mathematics are usually intellectually sharp. Here, subtle means someone who is intellectually sharp. Natural philosophy, deep. Someone who engages in natural philosophy and argumentative thinking usually becomes a deep thinker. Someone who engages in understanding morality of the world becomes grave, or rather becomes someone who has a very cynical and grave disposition towards the world. And finally, someone who looks towards logic and rhetoric. You know what logic means? Rhetoric here means basically a question which does not really have an exact answer, or which does not really need to be answered. So someone who engages in understanding these concepts becomes skilled in an argument. That is, they are able to contend. Contend here means engaging in not exactly an argument, but a difference in opinion with others. So these few above stated lines actually have an ocean of meaning in them. You have to understand that this essay was written at a time when a lot of the concepts of physics that we are familiar with today did not exist back then. The divisions that we have today between physics, chemistry, and biology did not exactly exist back then. If someone was a physicist, the person also engaged in other things like philosophy, chemistry. There was no proper distinction. So from these lines, we can also understand what was the mentality of people back then. For example, what they considered the different subjects to mean. You can see that the differences that he gives are things like historians, poets, mathematicians, philosophers. But if someone was asked to list the jobs today, someone would say something like historians, chemists, biologists, and so on. So in these stated lines, he's saying that the ancients made certain rules and laws based on which the new generations can be wise and witty. Mathematics creates a subtle nature. Philosophers are looking for deep meaning and logic, and the rhetorics are able to defend themselves through argument. Now, Bacon strongly believes that wit can be surpassed. Now, Bacon strongly believes that wit can surpass anything. He does not believe that a person can be mentally challenged or anything of that sort. So, in the next few lines, he goes on to say that, nay, there is no stone or impediment in the wit that may be wrought out by fit studies. So stoned here means stop or halt. The plural of stop is stoned. And impediment means any sort of disability or anything that is stopping you from achieving your full potential. For example, a physical impediment would mean a physical disability. So he says that there is no stoppage or disability in the wit, or any disability in your intelligence or brain, that cannot be wrought, that cannot be fixed by proper type of studies. Like as diseases of the body may have appropriate exercises. Just like diseases of the body have appropriate exercises, proper reading of text can improve your mental conditions. So he gives some examples which were popular during that time. For example, he has written, bowling is good for the stone and reins, shooting for the lungs and breast, gentle walking for the stomach, riding for the head, and the like. So he has given examples of whatever was believed back then to help in fitness, and especially you might understand how shooting is helpful for the lungs, how gentle walking is helpful for the stomach. Riding was believed to be good. Riding was believed to be good for the head because of the way that people rode. It was extremely jerky and bumpy, and it was believed that it was good for your brain, and so on. So, if a man's wit be wandering, let him study the mathematics. So here he is saying what people should study if they want to overcome certain impediments in their wit. So if a man's wit be wandering, as in if a man has a wandering mind, he cannot focus on one thing for a long time, let him study the mathematics. For in demonstrations, if his wit be called away never so little, he must begin again. As in, while solving it, if his wit or intellect is called away, even for a little, as in, even if it wanders for a little while, he has to begin the sum or the demonstration all over again. If his wit be not apt to distinguish or find differences, as in, if he does not have the mental ability to distinguish or find differences between things and people, let him study the schoolmen, for they are simile sectors, splitters of hair. So he's saying that if someone does not have the basic mental ability to differentiate between things, then he should study the schoolmen, as in he should go to school. School here not only refers to primary, secondary, high school, but it also refers to college. Colleges back then were usually referred to as school. So it says that he should attend school and engage in academic professions. If he not be apt to beat over matters and to call up one thing to prove and illustrate another, let him study 197 of the lawyer's cases. That is, if he does not have the power of logic and cannot understand how one thing can be proved to another or illustrated to another, then he should study all the different lawyers' cases available. Finally, the ending line of the essay is, every defect in thinking can be cured by another form of study. So basically here what he is trying to say is that there are different types of thinking. Even today, people have recognized that there are various different kinds of intelligence, like academic intelligence, emotional intelligence, and so on. So similarly, people have different ways of thinking. You might have an academic style of thinking, a lawyer style of thinking, a more scientific way of thinking, and so on. And if any of these ways of thinking is not developed enough, then there is always an appropriate form of study that you can take to improve that line of thinking. So if you do not have a scientific enough method of thinking, you should go for mathematics. If you don't have a liberal enough way of thinking, you should go for humanities. And if you study these streams properly, then in the end, you will become a well-rounded person. So here there come some questions. First is, as you can see, the essay, even though it was written 400 years ago, it is still very relevant to today. So he has not used any specific examples. Like while explaining, I provided examples of WhatsApp forwards to explain how simple-minded men believe everything. So he has not provided any examples. He has only stated the basics of simple men, crafty men, and so on. And even today, you can apply it to different people because crafty men existed then, crafty men exist today. In a lot of ways, it is still the same. Bacon's view regarding studies, that it serves for delight, ornamentation, and ability, is still very much true today. So again, here he's referring to how even today you can see people who engage in personal and private education for delight, conversation for ornamentation, and studying for ability and interpretation of their traits. He talks about how corrupt men, that is crafty men, usually denounce education. They think it's worthless, they think it does not really have a certain point. Imprudent men only approve of education, that is simple men, they approve of education, they like it and they admire the ones who do it, but they don't really have enough motivation themselves to engage in it properly. And also how wise men utilize education according to the command of the real world. He also warns that educated men should not indulge themselves in unnecessary argument with people. And likewise, educated men must not suppose that education can always cause the correct conduct or interpretation. Just like I said, if you're an educated person and throw rubbish on the road, then that is not the correct conduct or interpretation that wisdom should have led you to. And also he talks about how different types of books should be read, how some books should only be read, some ignored completely, some chewed and digested, and some should be understood with proper interpretation. He also mentions how if you read a book only via extracts, he also mentions that how if you read a book only via extracts from others, then it should not be such that it deals with an extremely important subject matter. It should only deal with sublime subject matters. So one thing you must have noticed throughout the essay is that how he has used the rule of three in almost every single paragraph. From the beginning, he believes. So the rule of three is when someone uses three specific rules or sentences and combines them together. So one basic thing that you must have noticed throughout the essay is that how Bacon has utilized the rule of three in almost every single paragraph. Now, the rule of three is often used to provide a very smooth reading experience. One very common example of the rule of three is in the famous lines, I came, I saw, I conquered. So the rule of three basically includes sentences or explanations like this which come in groups of threes and have a similar subject matter. From the beginning, you can see that every time he has introduced a new concept in the essay, it has always been in groups of three. So this also makes explanation easier later on because people can keep tag of what's going on. So the first sentence was basically, studies serve for delight, for ornamentation and for ability. And then for these three, he goes on to explain how delight is in privateness and retiring, ornament is in discourse, and ability is in the judgment and disposition of business. Again, in the next paragraph, he goes and talks about men, how crafty men condemn studies, simple men admire them, and wise men use them. Again, while explaining about books, he talks about three types of books, that some books are to be tasted, others are to be swallowed, and some are to be chewed and digested. While explaining about how men are, he talks about how well reading makes a rounded man, conference a ready man, and writing an exact man. So every single time you can see that he has used the rule of three and then explained them easily. The rule of three is used because किसी भी सेंटेंस को अगर आप तीन पार्ट्स में डिवाइड करके उसी तरह एक सिमिलर फ्रेजिंग के साथ रिपीट करते हैं तो ये देखा गया है कि इट इज़ बीन द मोस्ट इफेक्टिव इन होल्डिंग द रीडर्स अटेंशन. If it is more than three, then usually people lose track. If it is less than three, then you cannot really rhyme it. And so this has been used very effectively in the essay. The essay is divided into several parts, जैसे कि मैंने कहा. And basically the entire purpose of the essay is finding man's purpose in life, which is served by reading of books. The entire essay emphasizes on the importance of knowledge, open-mindedness, and theory empowerment skills. Without books, there would not be any need for improvement for man, and so there would be no other means of satisfying his curiosity. That is what the first half of the essay talks about. That is how and why liberal arts education is important, why books are important, and how different people use books. So a man's purpose in life is not limited to appreciating what he has for in some perspective, because a man can have insatiable needs and desires. So being alive basically means wanting to know more. The main point of all this is that there will always be new discoveries, always a reason to obliterate existing knowledge with new one. And as Janet Burgess says, if in the last few years you haven't discarded a major opinion or acquired a new one, check your pulse, you may be dead. So basically this essay is also a call for people to always engage in new knowledge, trying to form new opinions based on new information. Just because you have formed a certain opinion based on certain knowledge that you have does not mean it is the end all for everything. You can always find new discoveries, get new knowledge, and reform your opinions based on that. The second part of the essay, as we saw, explained how different types of people read books. For example, some books should be tasted, digested, and so on. And हमने ये भी देखा कि किस तरह different books को हम इसके basis पे classify कर सकते हैं. Novels, classics किस तरह इन पे depend करते हैं. जो ऐसे का third part था उसमें basically यही था कि किस तरह different तरह के लोग, simple men, crafty men, just men, etc. पढ़ाई और लिखाई को use करते हैं और अपने means को उससे improve करते हैं. And the final part basically was a conclusion or justification provided by Sir Francis Bacon, where he stated that reading the proper kind of literature or the proper kind of material can remove any mental impediment. So this was actually such a famous essay which was written in 1625 that more than 100 years later in 1753, जैसे मैंने कहा, Samuel Johnson published another argumentative essay based on this, which was known as On Studies. अगर आप इस essay को और अच्छे तरीके से समझना चाहते हैं या फिर किसी एक accomplished author की opposing view देखना चाहते हैं इसके ऊपर, then I would highly suggest that you read the essay On Studies by Samuel Johnson, which is much longer than this. It is a 1700 word essay, पर ये आपके सिलेबस में नहीं है, इसीलिए आई विल नॉट बी गोइंग इनटू डिटेल्स ऑन दैट। जैसे कि मैंने स्टार्टिंग में ही मेंशन किया था, ऑफ स्टडीज़ वाज एक्चुअली पब्लिश्ड इन अ सीरीज विद 10 अदर एसेज बाय सर फ्रांसिस बेकन। तो इनके डिफरेंट नेम्स है, जैसे कि ऑफ डेथ, ऑफ एडवर्सिटी, ऑफ फ्रेंडशिप, ऑफ लव एट्सेट्रा। अगर आप और भी ज़्यादा राइटिंग्स पढ़ना चाहते हैं सर फ्रांसिस बेकन के, तो आप उन एसेज को चेक कर सकते हैं। डिस्पाइट दीज एसेज बीइंग रिटन सो मेनी years ago, the one reason why all of these are still very much valid today is because Francis Bacon was a very free and open-minded thinker. As I said, Francis Bacon is also known as the father of modern science. He initiated a massive reformation of every process of knowledge for the advancement of learning. He also invented the Baconian method. So mainly he was actually quite important in the advancement of science. Now it might be difficult to understand how someone who was involved in humanities helped in the advancement of science, but you have to understand that irrespective of what the subject is, people always have a certain framework or mindset of thinking. So that is what he tried to influence. He always kept on asking people, using his articles, using his lectures, etc., to keep on a naturalistic approach, to keep on questioning, to keep on their enthusiasm and curiosity. He kept on asking people that whenever you see something, ask for proof. And so by this, a type of method for plotting was invented, in which he basically asked that any procedure or any plotted procedure of inquiring things should have an empiricist approach. Because of this, he was also one of the philosophical inspirations behind the progress of the industrial age, which came much later on. He always suggested that scientific work should be done for charitable reasons, and science should advance so that it can alleviate human misery. It should progress so that people who are maybe today poor and living in certain conditions which are not desirable, that someday science can help them rise up and inventions of useful things can help them lead a better life. So in this way, his particular mindset on humanity was also adopted by many scientists. He authored several books and essays and advocated reformation of laws, many of them even religious, moral, and civil. So, Off Studies has only been one of his essays, and you can check out the rest of the essays if you're interested. Some of the major questions that I can think of that might come from this essay are related to the 4 different parts of the essays that we looked at. तो जैसे एक मेजर क्वेश्चन जो है वो ये हो सकती है कि what are the views of Francis Bacon regarding studies in his essay? So this basically relates to the first portion where he explains how studies can serve for delight, ornamentation, and ability, and how he warns the readers that too much study can result in different problems with the different readers. From the second part, a question that can arise is, explain how the line, some books are to be tasted, others to be swallowed, and some few to be chewed and digested, come in reference to the context of Bacon's essay. तो इसमें बेसिकली आपको यही एक्सप्लेन करना पड़ेगा कि किस तरह उन्होंने बुक्स को वो डिफरेंट पार्ट्स में डिवाइड किया है और किस तरह वो रेकमेंड करते हैं डिफरेंट बुक्स को एब्जॉर्ब किया जाए. जो थर्ड पार्ट से क्वेश्चन आ सकती है वो है यही कि व्हाट आर द 3 मेन बेनिफिट्स ऑफ स्टडीज़ दैट बेकन मेंशन्ड इन हिज एसे एंड व्हाट आर द डेंजर्स एसोसिएटेड विद ईच बेनिफिट. तो ये बेसिकली पूरे लास्ट पार्ट को एनकम्पस करती है, जहाँ उन्होंने समझाया किस तरह बिजनेस या पॉलिटिक्स या रिलीजियस या मॉरल सब्जेक्ट्स में इनकी बेनिफिट्स आ सकती है, किस तरह एक इंसान अपने इंटेलेक्ट को आगे ले जाने के लिए किसी स्पेसिफिक डायरेक्शन के लिए उसके लिए सब्जेक्ट्स लाइक मैथमेटिक्स, फिलोसफी एट्सेट्रा चूज़ कर सकता है. And finally, how one own person's life experience and wisdom can also help in understanding context matter better. Bacon also places a lot of importance on writing, which is kind of obvious thing seeing that he himself engaged in writing essays. He has stated again and again that writing, and when he says writing, he always means argumentative essays, that when you write, you understand things better, you develop logic. He links writing with compactness and preciseness. And he always said that if a person is unable to write on a subject clearly, his understanding of the subject is also vague. So this has been a summary and explanation of the essay of studies by Sir Francis Bacon. Thank you.